Hi, everybody. I don't even know what to say anymore. Welcome to Resistance Live. It's the 28th of January, 2025. We're only 8 days in. Like many of you, I'm having a moment today because the breaking news is terrible. Terrible. I know many of you come here because you want to hear me talk you off the ledge. And I just have to say that today is not going to be a day where I'm going to be able to do that. So I apologize for that. I am, of course, ECM. We're going to talk about this pause memo, which is truly like the end of the federal government as we know it if it stays in place. It's also wildly illegal, but we'll talk about that in a second. For our visually challenged viewers today, I am wearing an off-white V-neck sweater. My hair is down. I'm a pink-skinned, green-eyed, dirty, blonde-haired woman. I have the window open over here. Sorry, you guys. So, the glare is on my face, but I hope it's not too bad. I am coming to you, as always, from occupied Tongva. Not Tongva. That's my old California land. Muncie, Lenape, and Mohican land. And I am in my office today, as always, in front of my bookshelf and my yellow cart and the big cushy chair. Okay, so yesterday, with no warning, Trump issued an executive order that essentially paused all federal funding, all grants and loans, all SNAP benefits, which are food stamps, all WIC benefits, which are women, infants, and children that are designed to keep babies from starving. All benefits, essentially, that anybody relies upon that he deems as being out of line with his agenda. This is, as I said at the top of the broadcast, wildly illegal. Wildly illegal. There is a federal law called the Impoundments Act of 1974 that prohibits presidents from doing exactly this. However, the problem right now is that word has gone out to every single federal agency that does anything. Medical agencies, NIH, CDC, FDA. FDA does a lot of things that aren't medical, but it does some. It's gone out to the Defense Department, where people inside the Defense Department have been ordered to stop procuring goods. That means no toilet paper, no food, no tactical gear for people in our military, among other things. Word has gone out in terms of anybody who is receiving a grant, whether that's an NEA grant or a grant that involves, that's National Endowment for the Arts, or a grant that involves education, or a grant that involves medical research. Done. Paused. They have essentially stopped all federal funding. Now, there will be lawsuits about this. There's literally no doubt about it. There will be lawsuits filed probably today that allege that this entire executive order is a violation of the Impoundments Act. And this should be very, very clear as far as what a judge would do looking at this case. And there are many, many people who are likely to be, like many groups of people who are so likely to be adversely impacted on this that there is likely to be an absolute flood of litigation around what this does. But for now, the really bad news is that there's no way to get the money flowing until Trump decides he's ready to do it. And so I, like many others, am quite immediately very, very worried about the people that I know who are on SNAP, the people that I know who rely on WIC, the people that I know who rely on Social Security, who rely on, other forms of social safety nets. Those are gone as of yesterday. Like they're essentially just frozen in place. So one of the things that I just wanted to do today was come on here and remind you all of a few very significant things, okay? There is a reason, and I said this on Blue Sky this morning, why I have been essentially, like in my own way, screaming about the importance of mutual aid and dual power since the day after the election. Because anybody who was paying attention to Project 2025 and what it was planning to do as soon as Trump was in office saw this coming. Maybe not this quickly, right? I mean, I will say that I am a little bit surprised at the speed, but I will tell you, like Simone Sanders, who's out there this morning on TikTok and Threads and other places saying, when you believed them, when they told you who they were, it's hard to be shocked at this. I'm shocked at the speed, but I have to say that one of the reasons why I've been leaning so hard into the issue of local community organizing for mutual aid and survival is because they told us that they were going to do this. Maybe not this quickly, Maybe not this immediately, maybe not this illegally, okay? But they told us they were going to do this. And they've honestly been telling us this for a very long time. Steve Bannon's been talking about dismantling the entire federal government since 2015, at least. So that's 10 years. Now, the thing I just want to remind you all of is that this means that there's going to be a lot of very desperate, hungry, suffering people. And that's on top, by the way, of everything that's happening with ICE, which we haven't even gotten to yet. They arrested 1,200 people yesterday. 1,200 people. 1,200 people. Very unclear whether or not, like, any of those people actually had legitimate deportation orders in place. So all of this is moving very, very, very fast. And, you know, one of the things that I want people to be very thoughtful about is that if you are not in community with others, Social Security and Medicare are not yet affected. Not yet, okay? Yet being the operative word of that. The thing I want people to remember here is that when people get desperate, the only thing at this point that is going to keep people alive is one of two things. It's either going to be state and local governments who are going to be doing their own thing, but that is only reliable in blue states, and even then probably only in some of them, and mutual aid. Mutual aid. That's it. So the importance right now, and honestly the importance since like November 6th of getting into community with people in your area has never been more important. And it's not too late, okay? I'm not saying any of this because it's too late. The reason why I'm saying it is because if you didn't understand the critical importance of mutual aid and building alternative structures of survival, namely dual power, prior to now, I think you probably understand why it's so critical today, okay? And one of the things that I want folks to be like particularly mindful of is that there are millions of people who rely on SNAP for food. Millions of people, okay? This is not like some small number. It's not, you know, like every other person, right? You know, like in like your neighborhood, to be certain, but there are people in your neighborhood who are relying on SNAP to survive. No doubt about it. And so the key thing right now that I just want people to be very, very mindful of is that mutual aid is where it's at. Now, the good news is that mutual aid organizations have been organizing together, okay? So there is something called Mutual Aid Hub, I believe it's .org, where you can actually search for mutual aid organizations where you live. I will warn you all, though, that I went on there yesterday, and my biggest mutual aid org here where I live isn't even on it, okay? So don't rely on that as the exclusive means of finding a mutual aid organization where you live, but it is profoundly critical that you get in community with people who are doing mutual aid work. If you have something to offer, offer it. If you need help, ask for it. If you have the ability to contribute, give money. Okay? Like it's that we have reached a stage right now where, you know, literally small families with kids with small families, families with small kids. Man, my brain isn't working well today. I'm still like suffering from like my COVID recovery. You know, people who rely on SNAP to survive are not going to have their benefits. And that's leaving aside everything else. You know, we have people who are losing their jobs, who have been fired. We have DEA employees in the government who have been fired, just flat out terminated. We have people who have lost grant money that they were relying on to survive for the next year. There's also an enormous attack underway right now in terms of higher education. And the cuts of grants and loans in higher education is going to make a serious world of hurt in terms of what's going to happen to higher education in this country, which is intentional. It's intentional. They want higher education to only be available to the super rich because people who are educated know how to organize. People who are educated know how to cut through disinformation. People who are educated see him and his people for who they are. So all of this from this point forward is fundamentally about survival. And that doesn't mean that there's not going to be court intervention. It doesn't mean that this isn't going to end up in front of the Supreme Court, because it probably will. And I don't want anybody, the one place where I will not be wildly pessimistic today is on this, because the Impoundments Act could not be more clear. Okay, like it really couldn't be more clear that the power to determine how money is allocated does not lie with the president. Period. period. It lies in the hands of Congress. That's it. So one of the things to keep in mind here is that, of course, the courts could and likely will interpret this as being a wild violation of the law. Whether or not Trump decides to abide by the law and he and his lackeys decide to abide by the law is another matter entirely. And one of the things that I and other lawyers are very worried about right now, given the nature of the way the rule of law has collapsed in this country in the last 10 years, is that if there is a ruling from the Supreme Court that says this is illegal, you can't pause government funding, and he defies it, we're kind of fucked. And that's not something that it's not about immunity, Doreen. This is the other thing everybody has to understand. He doesn't have immunity to violate the law. He has immunity within the scope of his presidential authority. Freezing federal funding is not within the scope of his federal authority. So it's important for people to understand how these things intersect, okay? SCOTUS didn't give him immunity on everything. I know there's been like a lot of wild overstatements about what that decision did. They did not give him permission to violate every law. They did not do that. They gave him permission to have immunity. They essentially gave him immunity within the scope of his presidential authority, and they demarcated that presidential authority to include things like conversations with other federal officials, like the acting attorney general when the January 6th insurrection was underway. They did not say to him, it's okay for you to freeze federal funding and usurp the entire activity of the Congress. That is not within the scope of his federal authority, his presidential authority. It's not within the scope of it. It's in fact like illegal. So one of the things that people need to be very, very thoughtful about here is outcomes. And, again, I will say what I said yesterday, which is that we do not know the future. And it's really important to remember that, because it means that your own actions and the actions of people that you are in community with can actually positively impact the future. But we are in a very scary and dark time right now. And one of the things that people need to be mindful of is that as we hit the point where these social safety nets are not available anymore, okay? And this is the other thing I just want to say here. It's people need to be really clear on all of this, okay? Like SNAP benefits are on the chopping block. WIC is on the chopping block, okay? Social Security and Medicare, not yet, okay? But direct benefits to people that need them to survive are frozen when it comes to SNAP and WIC. Babies are going to starve because of this. So it is incredibly important to understand that while the outcome is not yet known of how this will play out in the courts, there's going to be an enormous amount of desperation in the near future. And that's leaving aside everybody who's lost jobs, who's lost funding, who was relying on grants and loans in order to survive. Okay? So we're not even talking about social safety net stuff when it comes to that. So please be in community with the organizations where you live that are doing the work of keeping people alive. All right. Like I can't emphasize it enough. And, if you live in a place where you don't know your neighbors and you know that your neighbors are not flying a Trump flag in front of their house or a don't tread on me flag, it's probably a really good idea to get to know your neighbors now. Because, we're what we need. So let me just say a couple of other things here in relation to this. Schumer gave a press conference this morning expressing absolute outrage at the fact that Trump had essentially shut down the federal government funding by signature. And it's good that he's doing that. All right. It is really important for people to understand that essentially they've frozen all the funding of the federal government, with a few exceptions. But one of the things that I want people to also understand is that there is a real growing dismay with the lack of response from the Democratic Party that is actually offering any kind of pushback. And what that means is that we are not seeing beyond AOC, Jamie Raskin, Elizabeth Warren, really not very many others stand up and actually push back against what Trump is trying to do. I will tell you all that I was profoundly upset by Tammy Baldwin being the person who introduced one of Trump's nominees on the Hill. I do not understand why Democrats are trying to play ball with the Republicans or with Trump in any way, shape, or form. It makes no sense to me at all. And I frankly don't understand why there isn't just immediate pushback on everything. There shouldn't be a single Democrat voting for one of his nominees, period. It just doesn't make any sense to me. And I said yesterday that I was trying to kind of like figure out why they were doing it. What's the strategy? Why would it just makes no sense to me. It makes no sense to me. And I frankly have reached a point now, and you all know I've given the Dems a lot of leeway, and I probably will again, depending on how this whole thing goes. But I will just say this. At the moment, I'm very frustrated. Like, I'm very, very frustrated with the leadership of the party and the fact that they're still going to cocktail parties, with like literal fascists. They're still doing these like dinner events where they're all like getting in the same room and laughing. And I am not so cynical or so bitter as to claim that they're all on the same side, because they're not. But simultaneously, I am very frustrated by the lack of organized pushback. I am at this point, like, very, very concerned about the fact that we don't seem to have any organized opposition in the Democratic Party and no plan. Lots of people out there saying like, this is really wrong. And my response is like, okay, what are you going to do about it? Literally, what are you going to do about it? At least AOC is out there saying like, I'll fight fascists until I'm 6 feet in the ground. And I believe that, right? At least Jamie Raskin is out there trying to find ways to push back really hard on the constitutionality or lack thereof of what's happening. What we are not seeing is organized opposition from the Democrats. And the moment for that, by the way, was like the day the election got lost. And, here we are right now. And I'm just like wondering what's happening. I'm just going to say one thing here, okay? Because I have to respond to this. It's not the let them strategy, okay? So let me just say one thing about this, because this kind of thing makes me apoplectic, and I'm not gonna do that on the broadcast today. I am gonna say this, okay? The let them strategy, for people who don't know, is like a theory by like a guru, like a personal development guru by the name of Mel Robbins, who claims that like when people want to do bad things, you should just let them do it, right? When she's doing that, she's talking about her son being able to go to prom in the rain, right? She's not talking about like, let the whole federal government fall apart so millions of people die, right? And one of the things that I think people need to kind of grasp is that letting our country fall apart, arguing that it should all just fall apart, is nihilism. And if you're a nihilist, that means everybody dies. Everybody dies. You die. People you care about die. People you love die. Marginalized people die first. And this is where I start to get very frustrated, with people who are like, why wouldn't we just let, people voted for Trump, let's let the whole country burn, because people will die. Like, people we love will die. People will die. That's why. That's why we fight. And to me, doomerism, I said it yesterday, I'm going to say it again. Doomerism is not a strategy. And, I'm forgetting who it was who posted about this. I think it was Anna Gifty yesterday on Blue Sky. Doomerism is not a strategy. My neighbor down the street who relies on Snap voted for Trump. Screw him. That is not a strategy for the survival of all of us. It's time to really wake up. Like, seriously, we don't have time for this nonsense anymore. Like, people in our own communities are going to suffer and starve if this EO survives. It's time to kind of like push back the kind of like nya garbage and actually get moving on helping to make sure people live. And I want everyone to understand one other thing about this, okay? We don't know how his base is going to respond to all of this. But I'm going to tell you something else that kind of doesn't matter. Like, I don't really care what the people who voted for Trump think about all this. What I care about is whether or not women with infants are going to starve to death, right? What I care about is whether or not families are going to be separated because they're artificially arresting people without deportation orders. What I care about is whether or not people who are on food stamps are actually going to be able to feed their children. And so we've got to move past this moment of wanting revenge that actually, as an impulse, means we all suffer, and moving instead toward actually the future that we would prefer to have. Because I know that I would prefer to live in a future where we care about each other, and where in our own individualized communities, we make sure people aren't unhoused, and we make sure people have enough food to eat, right? We make sure if people need medical care, they can go to a community medical clinic and get it. Like, that's the future I want. I don't want a future where I'm like obsessed with making the other side suffer because they've voted for a fascist, right? I mean, you can do that on the side if you want to. But my focus, and where I would recommend, frankly, that all of your focus be at this moment, is in making sure that people survive. And I think that one of the things that we've got to come to grips with as progressives and as people who actually care about other human beings is that if we don't actually start living that, we're never going to get there, right? And that doesn't mean you forgive your Trumpy neighbor who, it doesn't mean you forgive the person who's armed to the teeth. Doesn't mean you even have to interact with them. But it does mean that you care about the people who are going to suffer, right? That you start acting in your own community to help people who are going to suffer. That if you yourself are suffering, you get into community where you can get help, right? It means living into principles of like literally a politics of caretaking. I've been talking about this for months, but like living into a politics of caretaking when you are struggling and you see other people struggling, your response needs to be, how can I help that? How can I get help that I need? How can I help others? What do I have to offer? What do I need? Right? This is the way to move in the direction of actually changing things. And I'm just going to say one other thing here. It's also time to move on from this thing of like, where's our charismatic leader who's going to rise and lead us all into the streets? You're it. You're it where you live. Like, you don't need anybody's permission to make a difference in your own community. You don't need anybody's permission to organize in your own community to make sure people have food, right? You don't need anybody's permission in your own community to go knock on your neighbor's door and say, hey, how you doing? I just want to check in and see if you needed anything. You're the leader you're waiting for. We're all the leaders that we're waiting for. Like, we're it. So given that we aren't in a position where we have a legitimate opposition party that's organized, and we've got Trump essentially like erasing as many social safety net benefits as he can get away with right now with no end in sight, like at least not as of this moment, who knows, we might have an injunction by the end of today. We've really got to focus on how we can each individually make a difference. And like, I hope you all understand, this is why I've been preaching this stuff nonstop here, in addition to giving you guys the news and all the analysis since November 6th. Like, some of us really saw this coming and knew that this was where it was at. So that is my advice, is to like figure out the mutual aid community where you live and get in touch with them today, like today. And if there isn't one, start building out your own neighborhood community pod. It can be as little as like 3 or 4 people. Well, how are you guys going to help each other out? I've got my neighbor, by the way, in my pod, because she knows I'm still recovering from COVID. She made me green juice this morning. She's like, look, I know you're still working your ass off. You got 2 kids to raise. I'm making you green juice because you need some good stuff in your body. It's on your front porch. Small things make a huge difference, right? And that's like the tiniest of gestures. But it also means that I feel cared for and I know I'm not alone. And it also means that like the next time she needs dinner, because she's a single mom with 2 kids, I'm going to give her half my soup. These are basic things that we can do to make sure that the people around us are cared for and that they have what they need. It's not hard. It's not hard. Okay, so a couple other questions that we had on the Patreon feed this morning that I just want to address really quickly. Someone asked a question about like Trump's obvious decline. I didn't watch the speech yesterday. I'm really trying not to consume him directly as much as possible. I just have to point something out to everybody who's like, is he going to be removed by the 25th Amendment? Vance is worse in some ways. Like, I hope everybody gets that. Vance is in the pocket of Peter Thiel, who is without question, like undeniably as far right-wing as you can get. I don't think that, the exercise of the 25th Amendment to remove Trump is going to change any of this. All of these guys are in bed with Steve Bannon. They all have the same agenda. Project 2025 is not unique to Donald Trump. So this is the other key that I think people need to get right now, okay? There's not any immediate way out of this, right? There's not any immediate way out of it except what you can do where you live. Nobody's coming in to save us. House and Senate are controlled by Republicans. Yes, who knows what could happen, but we have to deal with like the reality on the ground right now. Okay. And the reality on the ground right now is that even if Donald Trump were to be removed tomorrow, all of this would continue. Okay. I have to do a quick note concerning, I had a lot of questions on the Patreon feed this morning about passports. And And there's also a reason why, as of November 6th, I told everybody to go renew your passports like now. I will tell you that that was like top of my list. And I said it many times in November and December. Like, we got all 3 of our passports renewed as quickly as humanly possible. I paid for expedited service on all 3 passports, even though like we still had a couple of years left on my kids. Like, I was not going to let it last. And you know, I don't, here's what I can say. Okay. We have very, very serious incursions right now against trans and non-binary Americans when it comes to passports. We talked last week about the fact that the Department of State has frozen passport applications for anybody with an X gender marker. That's a non-binary or gender fluid demarcation. As of today, they have frozen passport renewals for anyone who has ever changed a gender marker. So essentially, if your passport is expired and you are a trans American, you are stuck here. You're stuck unless you go back to the gender that you were assigned at birth, which is horrifying. Like, people are going to be trapped in this country, right? In this country that hates them because passports will not be renewed. And by the way, I have no idea what happens if you try to go back. Like, if you're AFAB and you're a trans man and you decide to go back to being designated as female, I don't know what the State Department's going to do with that, because right now they've frozen all passports where any gender marker has been changed ever for renewals. We don't know what's going to happen next on this front. And I had questions this morning of like, I know someone who's a naturalized U.S. citizen who doesn't have a passport because they couldn't afford it till now. Should they apply? I can't answer that for you. Like, I wish I could. I don't know what's going to happen. And frankly, I know there are a lot of parents and people out there who are really glad that they got their passports in hand before he was inaugurated. All bets are off on this, right? I think that it is important, right, to obtain a passport if you haven't gotten one, but I can't guarantee you that you're going to be able to get one at this point. And I don't think anybody can guarantee what's going to happen next, because these 2 things have happened in the space of like 4 days. So it is what it is, unfortunately. And the one thing I will say is that I would also expect litigation around this, because the 14th Amendment of the Equal Protection Clause should stop the federal government from being able to say, you're not allowed to have a passport because you're trans, right? Or you're not allowed to have a passport, God forbid, this hasn't happened yet, but if it does, because you weren't born here. And even then, who knows? Because birthright citizenship, right? Like, I mean, it's a mess. It's a mess. So, again, I just have to remind everyone that, there are a lot of moving pieces right now, and injunctions may issue, and also that there are going to be court challenges to almost all of this. So we don't really know what the outcome is going to be. But the other thing I will just say here is that I think it's really important right now. And I mean, I feel like I've been saying this for a decade, but it's really important right now to stand up for your trans sibs and non-binary sibs and the people in your life who are LGBTQ+. Because the persecution is crazy. It's crazy. I mean, they're essentially eliminating all trans soldiers. The language around this has been absolutely revolting, just revolting. And like, so much so that I'm actually not going to repeat it here. This is what it looks like, and it's extremely dangerous. And the language that is being used is language that precedes things like holocausts. So please, like, stand up for your trans sibs. Like, stand up for them. Like, it's really critical right now that we make our voices heard, especially if you're like cishet or, like passing. Just please don't let it slide. Don't let it slide. So, not the most upbeat broadcast today, you guys. Sorry. But please follow my advice. Honestly, the thing about being in community with people where you live is that it does make you feel better. Like, it makes you feel like that you have people who have your back. And particularly if you are marginalized or vulnerable in any way, having safety plans with people who live near you, it really is reassuring. It helps you to know that there are people there who care about you and want to keep you safe. And likewise, right? It is a balm to be in community with people who are like-minded, who care about you and your survival. So, I said it yesterday, I'm going to say it again. Like, getting involved where you live is not about just like giving. It's also about receiving. And I think all of us right now need safety wherever we can find it. So please seek it out. And, I'm really grateful to all of you for being here. This community is a part of the balm in my life, right? Just like the community in the Dual Power Accelerator, by the way, which I will mention today. 1 week from today, we are closing registration on the second cohort of the Dual Power Accelerator. Incredible community. incredible community. I mean, I'm just like, I can't say it enough. I'll drop a link up here when we're done, like I have been all week, but really encourage you to get in on that. We are closing scholarship applications this week. There's still an extremely limited number left, not a lot, for partial and full. So you can apply if that's something that's of interest to you. You know, community really matters. And, you know, please value it where you can find it and create it where you live, because there isn't really, even though this is wonderful and I'm like, I love you guys, there's also no substitute for having support in your own community where you live, like face to face. So please get with it. All right. Lots of love, everyone. I will see you all back here tomorrow at regular time. And, you know, take care of one another, be kind to one another, be loving to one another, make your own homes spaces of sanctuary. I know it's really hard because we're all very much on edge. You know, like I'm not flawless in this either. I get really stressed out in my own house sometimes, but I'm doing my best to make sure that for my kids and for the people that I love, they know they're safe with me. And we really need that. Like we really, really need it. We need that kind of like gathering and nurturing, and we're okay here and we're going to get through it together. We need that, like desperately. All right. That's it, folks. I will catch you all here live tomorrow. Thanks for being here. Don't forget to like, subscribe. If you're watching on the replay, drop me a replay in the comments, please. Don't forget you can share this broadcast with anybody you know who may need it. I'm wishing you all peace. Like, take care of yourselves. Like, we all really need to take care of ourselves and one another right now. All right. Lots of love. See you tomorrow. Bye.